Welcome to Storytime Fun, boys and girls. We hope you enjoy. Today's story is out of the Walt Disney's classic storybook. And today's story is called Walt Disney's Old Yeller. Nobody knew where Old Yeller came from. He just turned up one day at the Coates' cabin, sniffing and snuffing and wagging his tail. The Coates boys, Arliss and Travis, looked him over. Not that he was much to look at. He was big and clumsy and yellow. But Old Yeller was full of tricks, too. Whenever anyone picked up a stick or a stone, Old Yeller threw himself on the ground. He rolled around, howling and yowling, worse than a wildcat. Old Yeller and Arliss took to each other right away. "He's my dog now," Arliss said. "He's mine, isn't he, Mama?" But Mrs. Coates wasn't sure they should keep the dog. "If your papa was here, he'd know what to do," she said. But Mr. Coates was far away selling their cows. He wouldn't be back for months. So Mrs. Coates told Arliss that Old Yeller could stay for now. Whooping and hollering, Arliss ran for the pond with Old Yeller right behind him. When he was standing still, Old Yeller looked as though he couldn't walk without tripping over his own feet. But when he started running, he was like a streak of lightning greased with hot bear oil. He was swift and sure, and a sight to see. In fact, Old Yeller was so fast that he once caught a good-sized catfish in the pond for Arliss. Another time, he helped Travis drive some thieving raccoons out of the corn patch, and he was a wonder at herding cows and hogs. Then one day, Arliss did something he shouldn't have and got himself into real trouble. He caught a bear cub by the leg. And worse, he didn't let go. Even when the cub's mother charged at him, snarling and growling. Suddenly Old Yeller came bounding up. He tore right into that old bear. While Old Yeller fought the bear, Mrs. Coates and Travis pulled Arliss away from the cub. Whew. Whoa. Soon the big bear had enough of the fighting and he ran off. Through the brush, she ran off with her cub. When he saw that Arliss was safe, Old Yeller wagged his tail. "Oh, you crazy, wonderful old dog," Mrs. Coates said. She knew then that she was right to let Arliss keep Old Yeller. A few days later, a man rode up to the cabin. His name was Mr. Sanderson, and he had lost a dog, a big yellow one that was full of tricks. Old Yeller was his dog. When Mr. Sanderson started to take Old Yeller away, Arliss shouted, "You can't have my dog!" Mr. Sanderson looked at Arliss, and then he got down from his horse. "Just a minute, young fellow," he said. "What's that in your pocket?" "A horned toad," Arliss said, and he held it out. "Finest horned toad I ever saw," Mr. Sanderson said. Right then and there, Mr. Sanderson offered to swap his dog for Arliss's toad, if Mrs. Coates threw in a good home-cooked meal. Mrs. Coates smiled and nodded. So Mr. Sanderson got a toad and a meal, and Arliss got Old Yeller. "You're really my dog now, aren't you, boy?" Arliss said. Old Yeller just wagged his tail and lay down in front of the fire. He knew he was there to stay. Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.